If you're looking for ways to increase your productivity as a writer, this video is for you. My name is Nika Maples, and I help Christian coaches, speakers, and influencers write their book so that they can take their business to the next level while advancing the kingdom and transforming people in Jesus' name. One of the most common questions that Christian writers ask me is, how do I find time to write my book? It's a question of productivity. I like to think of productivity as being connected to our produce. The Holy Spirit gives us the ability to bear fruit. Fruit like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Yes. And that fruit or produce in our lives is the true measure of our productivity. But we still want to be good stewards of our time and our divine assignment. Here to talk about both the practical aspect of productivity and the spiritual aspect of productivity is my special guest, Thomas Umstattd. Anointed and appointed writer, God has prepared and positioned you for such a time as this. And a lot of times, the thing that holds you back from really making progress on the book that's been burning in your heart to write is the idea that you don't have enough time, or you don't know what to do, or you can't make the most of your time. That question of productivity is on every writer's mind, whether you're new to a career of writing or whether you've been a published author for some time. All of us wonder how to make the most of the opportunities that God gives us every day while balancing our family, friends, and what's most important to us. So today's guest, Thomas Umstattd, is going to share with us his practical ways of glorifying God and being productive in the art and craft of writing. Thomas, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, so glad you're here. All right, so I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your background and your history with books.
So I've been helping authors since 2007. I got started writing or building websites for authors, and I'd been building websites as a kid. I'd always found websites interesting, and so I started building websites for authors, and then they started wanting my help with marketing and training with marketing. And before I knew it, I was speaking at conferences and created the Novel Marketing Podcast, which is now the longest running book marketing podcast. So I've been teaching marketing so long that that's now all I do. I don't do the websites anymore. I just teach the marketing either through the podcast or through courses. And during that time, I was also a marketing director for a publishing company, and I was a literary agent for a short time. And so I've gotten to see the industry from a bunch of different angles.
Yeah. So which has been your favorite view?
I personally enjoyed the teaching the most, the podcasting and the teaching. I learned the most as the marketing director because you get access to the data when you're running it. So you get to see the numbers, you get to see what works and what doesn't work. And indie authors get that data for their own book, but as a marketing director, I was able to see the data for dozens of books. And I was able to see some tactics work for some books and not work for others. And it helped me understand kind of how the publishing industry works in a more robust way.
Amazing. Okay. So, I have such an interest in how you've grown over the years, because years ago, maybe 2008 or 2009, I went to my very first writing conference. I was a public school English teacher at the time. I just had this great desire to write, but I felt so nervous. And I went to this Christian writers conference called Roaring Lambs in Dallas, Texas. And you were one of the presenters, and we're talking about your brand new company, Author Media. And you talked about social media, how important it was going to be for authors. And way back then, none of us, I think, had a social media presence that was worth anything. But I'm curious, two things. One, I'm really curious how you've changed since those early days when I saw you presenting, and starting your company. How has your view of book publishing, marketing, and all of that changed now. And then what have you seen change in the authors that you've worked with?
So back in 2009, which is, I think, when I spoke at Roaring Lambs, I was trying to get authors onto social media, and they weren't wanting to get on. And now in 2022, I'm trying to get authors off of social media, and they don't want to leave. So social media has really changed. The algorithms have really changed. You no longer are able to talk to people for free. The algorithms are smart enough to filter out all commercial messaging. So you can say stuff the whole time for free, and it's funny jokes, and you have a reaction. But as soon as you're trying to redirect them to Amazon or get them to leave that social network, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, that post directing people to leave will get de-emphasized in the algorithm, and people won't see it because they make money with time on site. That's the primary metrics that drive the value of a company, is time on site and monthly active users.
Thomas, you're blowing my mind already, because I actually did not know this. I wasn't expecting you to totally shock me with your answer. I'm a little bit shocked because I didn't realize that it was kind of evaluating and reading for sales language. And it is.
The artificial intelligence, machine learning neural network algorithms that are used by social media companies are some of the most sophisticated in the world. They are very, very good. And it's impossible to outsmart them. And you have to understand their goal and your goal are very different. You're there because you want people to leave and buy your book on Amazon, and they want people to stay and keep clicking ads. So if they only want the only escape from their website to be through an advertisement, not through free content. So they're happy for you to create free content as long as it drives clicks to their paying customers. But if you're not a paying customer, you can't use social media to effectively market your book. And it's actually been that way for a while. That was one of the things I learned as a marketing director. We did experiment after experiment trying to make Facebook work. And here I am, like, I've been using Facebook since the beginning. I helped political campaigns put together some of the very first political campaigns on Facebook. We were one of the first statewide races to do Facebook advertising, and we could not get Facebook to work. And all the things people were trying, I'm looking at the numbers, and it was not moving the numbers. It was this massive waste of time. And this was back in 2015. And since then, the algorithms have changed even more, making it where I have not seen in years, not just me, but anybody get results that they can show numbers for on Facebook that they didn't pay directly for.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay. So that explains a lot to me. As I've developed my confidence and ability to talk about opportunities like buying a book or working with me, I now recognize those particular posts do take a dip. And now I understand why. I didn't think that through. But I also have ads. So because I was seeing the traction with ads, I guess they kind of counterbalanced one another, and I wasn't noticing that if I was not paying, I was not seeing results. That's right. Interesting.
And the cost of Facebook is really high, the free version. If you deleted Facebook off your phone and stopped using it, other than the ads, which you check once a week or once a month, you could write an entire additional book every year with the creative energy and time that was going into social media. So going back to the original topic, of productivity, with my podcast, Christian Publishing Show, I interview lots of authors. My other podcast, Novel Marketing, I interview lots of authors. And something that almost all of the successful ones have in common is that they spend almost no time on social media. Creating content or consuming content. Instead, they're spending that time writing books, because that's what real authors do. For wannabe authors spend time in Facebook groups with other wannabe authors, giving each other advice that may or may not be good. But what real authors do is they turn off the social media and open up Scrivener or Atticus and actually write their book.
Okay, so that's how your messaging has really shifted. It's because you saw that in the beginning in 2009. I don't think any of us knew the cost, the long-term cost of being involved in social media. So you were wanting them at that time to get traction for their books, and then you realized they weren't writing books. After decades passed, it had a different kind of cost.
Also, in 2009, there was no algorithm of any meaningful nature. If you remember, Twitter originally was sorted based off of when a post was posted.
Right.
So the new post would go at the top and push all the other posts down. Facebook had something really similar. I think they launched the first proto versions of EdgeRank in 2012. 2011, but EdgeRank, their sorting algorithm really didn't get its full power until 2015, 2016. And so back in 2009, when I was pushing social media, you actually could get results on social media. You could build up a following there. And when you would post sending people to Amazon, you could bring a ton of sales to Amazon all at once without spending any money, just with creating content. And the same with a blog. You could drive a lot of traffic to your blog, or you could drive a lot of traffic somewhere else. And that's not the case anymore. And so the old advice doesn't work. And I actually had to retire my social media talk because so much of it just stopped being true because of the changes to the social media platforms.
Mm-hmm. So, wow. Okay. So let's say an author is listening to a new writer or experienced published author, either one, is listening to this and realizing, okay, yeah, he's right. I do want to reduce my social media time and just focus on the writing. But I always feel like I don't have enough time and I do want to be more productive. Where would they begin to assess areas to change?
So the first place to start is pruning, saying no to things to make time for the writing. So there are ways to optimize and be more efficient with the time you have. But if you're just getting started, canceling your Netflix subscription, getting off of Facebook, right? Making time, saying no to things so that you can say yes. Because every time you say no to something, you're really saying yes to something else. So when you're saying to your kids, no, I can't read you this book right now, I got to say yes to working, or vice versa, right? When you say yes to reading your kids a children's book, you're saying no to working. And once you realize that every time you say yes to social media or yes to Netflix, you're saying no to your book, it helps you kind of reorient your priorities. Because you can measure your priorities based off where you spend your money and where you spend your time. So you can say something is important, but if you're not willing to put your money into it, and if you're not willing to put your time into it, it's not important. You just want it to be important. And some people want to write a book, and some people want to write a book. And there's a big difference, because people who actually want to write a book are willing to make some sacrifices. And it's not a sacrifice forever. If you want to get Netflix again later, you can. Although you may find that your life is actually better off spending less time watching the news, right? If you're watching the news for an hour every evening, if you spent that hour writing, I would guess you'd be a happier person. This is something I need to work on. I'm watching the news a little too closely right now. And it's the news never makes you happy.
No. So, okay. So if someone starts by saying no, okay, and they're going to shift a few things that they realize, this is something that's eating up my time and my attention, and I'm just going to say no. But then they have made space, they've made time, they sit down, and they just don't. They draw a blank. What then?
So if you're drawing a blank with writing, it can be an indication that you haven't studied the craft of writing enough. If you're reading books on writing, especially on like plot structure, you often kind of know where to go next. The blank may also be because you are tired. So you can get physically tired, and where you are tired can shift based off of what you're doing, right? You're at the gym and you're working your arms are tired, and your whole body is tired, but not as much as your arms are tired, right? Walking is back to the car is easier than, say, pulling yourself there with your arms or paddling your way back. And the same is true with our minds. You can have a very exhausted mind. So another thing I've noticed between successful authors, the ones who are making a living at it and the ones who are not, so the ones who are making a living at it often give their fresh mind the writing task. So they're waking up early and they're writing before their mind gets a chance to get exhausted. And so they cut the Netflix time, but instead of writing during that evening when they would have been watching Netflix, they go to sleep. and then they wake up early before the kids get up, and then they write in those early hours of the morning, and with their fresh, rested mind. They got their coffee, they have just had their sleep, and they find that they are stronger mentally, stronger emotionally, and more creative when they give the first fruits of their day to the writing, or the second fruits. So some of them wake up and they have a quiet time and they pray, and then they write. But either way, you are going to write much more effectively and more efficiently if you do it first and then let your day happen. Then to let your day happen and you're like staggering into your writing session exhausted, especially if you have children.
Right.
By the time I get the kids to bed, I'm dead. I'm totally done. I have to recover before I get, if I'm going to, help clean up the house or put things back together. It's like the act of getting them down is such a big undertaking right now. But that's true with a lot of things in life. You don't have to have little ones.
With 3 under 3, right?
That's right. Three and under. So yeah, it's quite an adventure getting them down.
Right. And I think there can be with seasons. I mean, of course, you're in that adventure that is a season, because it will shift over time. But like, I think one of the things that happens is that parents who want to write, they attribute too much to a season. I don't have children myself, but I've seen this idea of like, okay, well, when they go to school, and then now when they leave home, well, now when, and postponing things because they're really putting too much emphasis on the season. So can you address that in any way?
So again, it has to do with priorities, and your life is, and also it's kind of a worldview issue. A lot of us are, especially in America, we're very optimistic. We believe tomorrow is going to be better than today, and next year is going to be better than this year. And that's not really true. There are unexpected bad things that are going to happen in the future. Now, sometimes we can go too far the other way and worry about those unexpected bad things and borrow trouble from the future. And then we get to experience the bad thing twice. We get to experience it now in our worry, and then again when it happens. And what's worse is that sometimes it doesn't even happen. So we've created evil in the world just by worrying about it, which is
wait a second. I gotta pause. That was so rich. That was such a good sentence. I want to think about it before you continue. We create evil in the world just by thinking about it. That's amazing in and of itself.
This is why Jesus commanded us not to worry. Worry is a sin. It's not just a bad practice, because we are bringing evil, we're multiplying it by taking potential future worry that may not even exist, and we're making it real, at least in our heads. And we're living in that place of worry rather than a place of thankfulness and joy.
Yeah. Multiplying it by living it twice. So if it does end up happening, we lived it twice. And if it doesn't happen, well, we still multiplied it because we took it from not happening to actually happening. And the body, I've read the body doesn't really know the difference between things that have actually happened and haven't. So you worry enough that you release the hormones that put you into fight or flight, or those kind of cortisol, overstressing your body. That can come just from the worrying about it. Yeah.
Repenting of worry is something we need the Holy Spirit's help with, because
Absolutely.
it's so pervasive. But it is something the Holy Spirit helps us with, right? It's not a good practice. It's a righteous practice, right? He is our helper, and he helps us repent. And repent means changing your mind. One of the big things you have to change your thinking on is worrying and control your thoughts. And so instead of worrying about the potential bad in the future, you as Jesus said, today has enough worries of its own, right? Clean your room, eat healthy, right? Be the best you can be today. Write your book, sit down and work on your book rather than worrying about the future. Write your book today and realize that the future may not be better. The future could be worse, but it doesn't matter because the future's not here yet. You have today, and you can choose, I'm going to write today or not. And the next question is this a season for writing? Because it may be. You're really busy, and the priorities that you have, writing really shouldn't be a priority. You're busy. A common thing that takes writers out of the game is a sick parent who moves in. And you know what? That's a real priority. That's not worrying about some future problem. You've got a parent who's elderly, and now you've been upgraded. You've been promoted to the holy calling of caretaker. And to do that, you've got to do it, which means you have to say no to other things. Now, maybe depending on how your life is structured, there's enough other things you can say no to where you can be a caretaker and still be an author. And I know a lot of authors who are successful at being both caretakers and being authors. But the one I'm thinking of, she consumes effectively no entertainment. She writes a lot of books. She cares for a lot of people, and she has no idea about the most recent Marvel movie. She didn't have time to watch it. So she's chosen what to say yes to and what to say no to, and how to structure her priorities. And I think she's done it in a really healthy way. But it's hard, and I'm not there. I still consume entertainment, and I'm not saying it's wrong to consume entertainment. I'm not getting that.
Right.
If you're writing books that are entertaining, you're not causing people to sin by writing them. For everything, there is a season, and there's a season to write and a season not to write. And trying to write in a season that's not a writing season isn't going to be very fruitful. But if you're writing in a writing season, it's still work. It's never going to be easy. We are cursed. God cursed us. Or he cursed our ancestors. He cursed the earth, right? We're going to bring forth fruit from the earth through sweat. We're going to have to fight thorns and thistles. And just because you're sitting in an air-conditioned room writing your book doesn't mean there's not still thorns and thistles that you're having to battle as you're writing. And you have to choose to work. You have to choose to do the work. And you have to choose to put in the sweat and the tears if you want to see fruit come from your writing.
Yeah. And I believe that Jesus broke every curse. So, but that doesn't mean that we still won't have the thorns and the thistles and to have to do the work. I liken it so often to a farmer that it's almost like we want such instantaneous harvests that we forget the beauty of the relationship that a farmer has with God. I mean, yes, there is the tilling of the ground, the planting, and then there's the waiting on the Lord of the harvest, who sends the sun, who provides the insects and the wind for pollination, and who, also sends the rain. And that part is out of your control. But to think that it's all out of your control is a mistake. The seeds will not get in the ground to begin the process of harvest if you don't take to the fields and do the work.
That's right. Yeah. You have to go in the field and get the weeds out. You have to go in the field and plant the seeds. And when bad things are happening, they can happen for a multitude of reasons. It could be you are experiencing the consequences of your own decisions. I deal with this with my children. It's like when you bonk your own head will be bonked.
Right.
And as small children, they don't understand this. They're like, oh, so when I run into the wall, it hurts, and I'm causing the pain that I'm experiencing. And we as adults, we cause a lot of our own pain, and we experience the consequences of bad decisions in our past. Bad things can also be happening because of the bad decisions of somebody else, right? One of my children takes a plastic toy and bonks one of the other children. The child is crying not because that child did anything wrong, although often when they're squabbling, there's enough blame to go around. But not because they did anything wrong, but because somebody else did something wrong. That happens with us as adults as well. And it could be because there's some sort of supernatural event, right? Job didn't do anything wrong, and yet he experienced bad things that happened to him. And sometimes it's because God has cursed us, or God is doing something to correct us, right? He disciplines us because he loves us, right? If you're sick because God has made you sick, then that's different than if you're sick because you're eating unhealthy, or because you're sick because there's some sort of, spiritual thing that's causing it. And so we live in a world where there's lots of different causes, and it's really toxic to believe that I am the cause of all of my problems, because that's not always the case. But it's also toxic to say all of my problems are somebody else's fault, because that is also not the case. I will say for my life, most of the problems in my life are caused by me, but they're not all caused by me. And I'm not powerful enough to solve all the problems in my life, because even the problems that I caused, I need God's help to overcome them.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that the only answer for that quandary is humility, just coming to him in prayer and being humble and saying, show me what's my fault. Show me where I need to change and be corrected. Show me where I need discipline, and just absolutely relieve my mind and bring peace about the areas that are not my fault. So beautifully said, Thomas. And I want to talk about focus for a second. When it is a season for writing, and when a person decides, like, I'm going to do this, what I notice with the women who, since I particularly work with women, what I notice is the first question they ask when they approach me about, how do I begin my book? They don't ask about how do they begin their book. They actually ask, they're obsessed about the publishing process, obsessed about, like, what am I going to do with it once it's written? And I'm like, your focus is in a place that's leaving a bunch of pages blank right now. Like, that's what I generally say. It's like, you're so worried about how you're going to get this published. That's not a question that you need to ignore. But also, you're not writing as long as you try to find the answer to that question. So, while we do want to have interest in the publication process, where should a writer focus, or how can they reframe the questions in their minds so that they can stay on task to write?
I think it's not wrong to be curious about the publishing process, because it does affect how you write the book, especially the marketing. Marketing is not something you add at the end. Books that sell well, marketing is something that you incorporate into the writing. You think about, what is the pain point that this book is addressing? It's true for fiction, and it's not nonfiction. One of the things I encourage on my podcast is to write the back cover copy of your book before you write the book, so that you're then delivering on those promises. And so in that sense, it is important to begin with the end in mind. But it is also very possible, especially if you're planning to traditionally published, to let the uncertainty of the gatekeeper saying yes to you to paralyze you. And that doesn't help. Those gatekeepers, they're looking for quality, they're looking for influence, they're looking for hustle, and worrying about that isn't going to help. So buy some books on publishing, take some courses, learn how the process works, know what a literary agent is, know how to get your book on KDP if you plan to independently publish it. It's not actually that complicated, especially if you get off of Facebook and stop getting the information trickled to you by people who don't know what they're talking about, and just buy a $5 book on indie publishing. Joanna Penn's got a great one. Buy some books on traditional publishing. Buy a book on writing a proposal. You'll find you can learn the material a lot faster by reading a book on it, rather than asking questions of people who don't have anything else better to do with their time than to give free advice on the internet, which is not the kind of person you want advice from. Get the advice from somebody who really knows what they're doing and wrote a book on it, not somebody who's regurgitating something that they got from somebody else who regurgitated it, and maybe all the way up the train, nobody knows what they're talking about. Maybe the original person had it right and the game of telephone got it distorted, and maybe the true signal has survived from group to group and from person to person. Or you can just go to the horse's mouth, read an actual book on it. And so educate yourself, know what you're getting into, because it's also important to know, is it really worth it? Am I willing to put in the work to go the distance? It's a real tragedy to give up halfway through because you thought it was going to be less than it ended up being.
Yeah. It's very important to focus, I think, to at least keep in mind the publishing. But I think one thing that new writers don't realize when they ask that question is that the timing, there's no way for them to answer all of the questions ahead of time, because publishers make a lot of their decisions based on what they've already got in the queue, as far as what's going to come out when, what types of books and what genre, what size of book. When my first traditionally published book was accepted, they said, okay, it's going to be this size. And I remember thinking, I don't want it to be that size. It was kind of like a gift book size. I was like, I thought it was going to be this standard, like 6x9 type of size. What's this gift book size? And they said, well, that's the spot in our, our portfolio of what was coming out this year. That's the only spot we had to put this book. And people they can't even know all of those decisions. And so, yes, have in mind what you hope for in publishing and get to know the basics on your side of things, but also let go of it, because in the end, your publisher, should you choose traditional publishing, is going to have a lot on their agenda that has nothing to do with whether your book is good or not. They are accepting certain types of books at certain times. And if they just happen to publish a book that was similar to yours, they may love yours, but they may not choose to publish yours simply because it's so soon after they already did one like it. So that leads me into a question about your time as a literary agent, because you've had those kinds of conversations and you've seen those publisher decisions that, there's just no way around it. They have certain things they can do and can't do. So what is your advice from a literary agent's perspective?
On how to get published?
Kind of, I think I'm asking things you wish new authors knew about publishing or working with a literary agent.
Okay, so when I was a publisher, there was when I was a literary agent, there's three things I was looking for. I was looking for resonance, and wanted to see that your story or your book, and I only represented nonfiction, was resonant with readers. So are you putting out content into the world that resonates with readers, where there's some evidence that people actually want to hear what you have to say and they want to hear it from you? Because you have to be faithful in the little things before you can be faithful in the big things. As Absolutely. Jesus said, until you are faithful with that which is another man's, who will give you that which is your own. And if you can't hold someone's attention with a 1,500 word blog post, how can you hope to hold their attention with the 50,000 word book? So I look for that faithful in the little things and the proof of resonance, proof that people are following you, primarily as evidenced by, were you able to convince them to do as small a thing as subscribing to your email newsletter? They're not going to trust you with their email. They're not going to trust you with their money and their valuable time. They're not going to spend 5 hours reading your book. They won't trust you with their inbox. And so that was the first thing, or one of the things that I look for. The next thing I look for is hustle. Are you willing to work hard? Are you willing to put in the work? And are you willing to do what needs to be done? Are you looking for shortcuts? That was really off-putting for me as an agent. That question, what's the easiest way to do X, always turned me off, right? It's like, oh, what's the easiest way to mark my book? What's the quickest tip on such and such? I was like, that's not the way. This is not a path
whatever
for
you're
shortcuts.
looking for.
Yeah. It's like you will get eaten by the big bad wolf if you're looking for the easy way to build your house, right? Building it with straw, building it with sticks is not going to keep you safe from the big bad wolf.
That's such a good analogy.
And there are a lot of wolves in this industry, and they are specifically preying on authors who want to walk the easy path. So you'll end up with some kind of hybrid publisher who, for money, will get you published today, and then we'll sell you and then your book won't sell, and then they'll sell you all these expensive marketing packages, and by the time you're out of money, they will leave you alone.
Right.
But they'll drain you dry first. And so I'm looking for people who had hustle. And then the third thing I was looking for is courage. Are you willing to speak the truth? And more importantly, are you willing to write clearly so that you can be understood? Because often the way that fear manifests itself is through unclear writing. We don't want to offend. We don't want to rub people the wrong way. So the sentences end up being bloated.
Again, you are saying so many little things here in this interview that are worth just sitting on for a minute. Fear manifests itself so many times in unclear writing. I've never thought that through before, but it's absolutely right. It's the person pulling back and not saying what they know they should say. Oh, wow, wow, wow. Okay. I'm going to go back and listen to this interview more than once because I mean from the Three Little Pigs analogy, I let that go by quickly, but this one and that was fabulous, but this one I had to pause. Fear manifests itself in unclear writing. I hope everyone's writing that down. Okay, I'll let you continue. I
It
had to
also
marvel.
manifests itself with writer's block, because I don't actually believe that there's such a thing as writer's block. It's just fear. We're afraid of not doing good quality, or we're afraid of critique because no one else has, plumber's block or musician's block,
Right. I have
right?
doctor's
Like,
block.
yeah, people put on their pants and they go to work. It's like, if it's a hard job, right, then hard people need to do the job, right? There's no such thing as small jobs, only small people. Like, our ancestors, your ancestors that suffered and starved and scratched out a living in a very hard world, are looking at you in your air conditioned office complaining that you don't have any ideas, and they're like, come on. This is you realize that we had to turn forest into farmland and then make a farm before we starved to death to scratch out a living in West Virginia, and you're sitting here complaining that it's scary to write your book because somebody might criticize you on the internet. Get over yourself. Write
Right.
the book.
Oh, that's so good.
I think part of the reason we're so eager to tear down the statues of the generations that came before us is because deep down we're envious of all of the successes that they had, and that we don't measure up because our lives are easier and yet we are doing less. I don't think that's always the case, but I heard somebody pointing that out. I'm like, I think deep down there may be some envy motivating this. Why else would someone want to tear down the statue of Christopher Columbus? It's like, what have you done?
Right. Wow. I never thought of it that way either. But in many ways, it's true. I mean, when it comes to just basic strength of character that is required to do the feats that people did in the past just to survive, we do have it pretty easy. So how I'll leave. I can't leave now without asking this final question. But like, how can someone combat fear? Then, if fear is causing unclear writing and writer's block, how would you tell them to combat fear?
It also manifests in perfectionism. And perfectionism
Oh
is
yeah.
another word for fear.
Oh yeah.
You keep working on it. You keep working on it because you're afraid to put it out there, because you're afraid to be criticized. So how do you combat fear? There's several ways. One way is to replace it with another fear. This is probably the most common tactic. This is why you create your deadlines for yourself. It's why you work better on a deadline, because your fear of violating the deadline or the criticism of whoever gave you the deadline replaces the fear that you had, whatever other fear you had. This is what gives many soldiers throughout history the courage to do scary things, is that the commanding officers make themselves scarier than the enemy. Like, the enemy might kill you, but I will kill you if you don't get out of this trench and charge, right? That really was what the officers were saying in World War I. They had a pistol, and it wasn't for shooting the enemy, it was for shooting their own troops if they didn't get out of the trench when the whistle blew. And so you can replace that fear with another fear. And there's lots of tricks that authors have for giving themselves consequences, or giving themselves penalties, where it's like, I was in a mastermind group one time where people would pick their own penalties. They had a deadline or something, and they're like, if I don't get it done, I'm giving you all a $25 Amazon gift card. And one of them missed their deadline, and we all got an Amazon gift card. And part of it was replacing the fear with the other fear. So that's one way to do it. And I'm not poo-pooing that. That actually does work, and it's what a lot of authors use, and there's a place for that. But ultimately, the better way to fight fear is with love. The more you love your reader, and the more that you care about your reader, and the more that you are writing a book that will really benefit your reader, the love casts out fear. And I don't know if we can love perfectly, but if we could, it would cast out all fear, as we read in the Bible. Perfect love casts out all fear. And the more you focus on your reader and thrilling your reader and blessing your reader, the less afraid you are. the less afraid you are to be perfect, the less afraid you are to write. All of that fear goes away. And if you don't do it for love of your neighbor, perhaps do it for love of God, right? For many people listening, your writings God told you to write, so you'd better write. If God of all the universe told you to do something, you had better do it and stop making excuses. God does not put up well with excuses, right? The unjust, or the steward that had the one talent and buried it in the ground and had all kinds of excuses for why he didn't invest it, got thrown out into outer darkness. That is a sobering parable. And so stop making excuses and just get to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what pops into my mind is that verse from the book of James. The one who knows what he ought to do and doesn't do it sins. If you know what you ought to do and you don't do it, that for you is sin. It's just hard to swallow. Yep. But wow, what gems of wisdom you've shared today. I appreciate it more than I can say, because wisdom's worth far more than rubies. And that's what I feel like you've given in this brief interview. I could have talked longer, because what you wove together was the practical aspect of productivity and writing, but more importantly, it's the spiritual aspect of being people who advance the kingdom through this one creative act. Thomas, this has been a blessing, and I just hope that we'll have a chance to have another interview someday. I'm looking forward to it. If we went from like 2009 to 2020, there may be another visit in the future. I hope sooner.
Yeah, and maybe not waiting 10 years next time.
Right. Right. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.